Hello, my name is Isaac Genova. I currently work for the St. Charles Parish Sheriff's Office here in Louisiana. This is my Criminal Justice Capstone Project presentation for Criminal Justice 491-8 Alpha. In this project, we will analyze law enforcement's response to the Boston Marathon bombing. The Boston Marathon bombing is also known as a critical incident. In law enforcement, we always strive to train for critical incidents because they can happen spontaneously. A critical incident can be defined as any event that has a stressful impact sufficient enough to overwhelm the usually effective coping skills of an individual. Research has shown that critical incident stress affects up to 87% of all emergency service workers at least once in their careers. During a threatening event, the body goes into an autonomic nervous system response. This is also commonly referred to as hyperarousal state, acute stress response, or the fight or flight response. However, law enforcement officers generally don't have the luxury in fleeing from a life or death situation. When a threat is perceived, the unthinkable is witnessed. Unfortunately, critical incidents can range from anything that can be such as the Boston bombing. It could be an active shooter in a school, at a grocery store, or it can be as simple, unfortunately, lack of thereof, as responding to a shooting. As we go through the timeline of the Boston bombing, at 2:39 on April 15, 2013, that is when two young men known as Tamerlan and Drazakar, carrying backpacks, turned off Gloucester Street onto Babylon Street. The young man in the black cap is later identified as Tamerlan Tarsonovi, and the other is his brother, Drazakar, both of Cambridge. 2:49, approximately 10 minutes later, seconds after hanging up with Tamerlan, Tarsonovi detonates the bomb in front of the Marathon Sports. Approximately 12 seconds later, a second bomb is detonated. This is known as a critical incident, where you have multiple injuries and casualties, and law enforcement, along with medical responders and firefighters, have to respond to the situation despite not having a clear picture of what's going on. The response was an overall success in the apprehension, the apprehension of the suspects. A state report released Friday called the overall emergency response to the Boston Marathon bombings a great success, but revealed that some police officers fired recklessly in the Watertown shootout with the suspects. The first officers who were confronted with the Marathon bombers acted appropriately, but a swarm of police often failed to identify their targets before firing. Now, according to some released reports, there was approximately 2,500 officers that responded to this incident. And for these officers who were clearly trained in how to use their firearms and clearly trained in how to identify a suspect, should be able to identify their suspects before firing. If you look in the picture here, you'll see the boat that the Drazakar was hiding out in. As you see, you can see multiple bullet holes in this boat. That shows that the officers were shooting recklessly. After the Watertown shootout, police start door-to-door searches, which a lot of people think this is unconstitutional, but it's not. It's in the interest of the public safety, which falls under the public safety exception. That is why the Drazakar Tarsonovi was not required to be Mirandized prior to being questioned at the hospital. Of course, on April 19th, Tamerlan dies due to the Watertown shootout and his brother contributing to his injuries by running him over. That was at 12:50 in the morning, and at 8:45 p.m., that's when Drazakar is captured. A total on a medical release journal report, a total of 281 people were injured. 127 patients received care at the participating trauma centers that day. 3, or 1%, were immediate fatalities at the scene and no hospital mortality, which is awesome. 66%, 0.6% suffered lower extremity soft tissue and bony injuries. 31 had evidence for exacerbating hemorrhages with field tourniquets in place in 26 patients. If you look in the lower left-hand corner, the picture will show a rigid Cat 5 tourniquet holder that can be installed on duty belts, such as the one that I wear. I have one on mine. They are extremely helpful because in a matter of seconds, you have to place one on a lower or an upper extremity bleed from an arterial bleed. It can prove to be very vital in saving someone's life. 75 patients admitted, where 54 underwent urgent surgical intervention, with 12 or 22% underwent amputation of the lower extremity. The tourniquets that's also pictured below and the ones that were placed on the scene were implemental in saving a lot of lives. These are your survivors. They're years later, they're still coping with the incident, and they're Boston strong. Of course, we're gonna have to remember the victims: Crystal Campbell, Lingsley Liu, Martin Richard, who was only 8 years old, and MIT officer Sean Collier, who was gunned down and ambushed by the Tamerlan brothers, or Tarsney brothers. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope that you have learned a little bit about the Boston Marathon. I think law enforcement responded very accurately, even though they could have identified their targets better. But in a critical incident we're faced with, there's a lot of confusion, and in order for us to figure out that confusion, mistakes do happen. I do hope that these incidents will stop in the future, but as a law enforcement officer, I do know that they won't. All we can do is train and prepare for what might happen. Thank you.